Deep beneath the soil of the sprawling Meadow Ridge forest, the bustling kingdom of the antiverse stretched for miles. To outsiders, the lives of ants seemed simple, marching in lines, collecting food, and digging tunnels. But to Antony, a young worker ant freshly hatched into the world, being an ant wasn't the idyllic life that outsiders imagined. Instead, it was a tale of relentless toil, constant danger, and a hierarchy so rigid that individuality was almost non-existent. This is Antony's story, an account of why, despite their strength in numbers, it truly sucks to be born as an ant. The first thing Antony remembered after hatching from his egg was the overwhelming scent of earth and pheromones. Around him, worker ants bustled about, carrying food, digging tunnels, and tending to the queen's endless supply of eggs. There was no time for play or discovery. Every ant had a role to fulfill from the moment they were born. "Get moving, hatchling," barked a soldier ant as Antony tried to stretch his newly grown legs. "The queen doesn't lay eggs for you to sit around." Antony was immediately assigned to the worker caste, a fate shared by the majority of ants in the colony. His life would revolve around collecting food, digging tunnels, and defending the colony when necessary. There was no room for dreams or aspirations. The queen ruled over all, and her commands dictated every ant's purpose. Every day was the same. Antony and his fellow worker ants would leave the colony in single file, guided by the scent trails laid down by their predecessors. Their mission was simple: find food, carry it back to the nest, and repeat. But what seemed simple to outsiders was a grueling and thankless task. Antony's first foraging mission took him to the edge of a picnic site, left by the humans. A crumb of bread, larger than himself, loomed before him like a mountain. Antony, along with a dozen other workers, struggled to lift and carry the crumb back to the colony. The journey took hours, and predators lurked at every turn. As Antony struggled with his share of the load, he couldn't help but envy the larger creatures around him. Birds soared freely in the sky. Squirrels leaped gracefully from tree to tree, and even the lazy caterpillar seemed to have a more leisurely life. "Why do we have to work so hard?" Antony whispered to himself. Being an ant meant living with a constant awareness of danger. Antony quickly learned that nearly every creature in Meadow Ridge Forest viewed ants as either food or pests. One fateful day, Antony's foraging team crossed paths with a group of beetles. While Antony admired the beetles' shiny exoskeletons and powerful mandibles, the admiration was short-lived. The beetles attacked without warning, crushing several of Antony's companions. Antony barely escaped with his life, vowing never to underestimate the dangers of the outside world. But predators weren't the only threat. Humans, with their towering forms and unpredictable behaviors, were perhaps the most terrifying of all. Antony still remembered the time a human child, amused by the ants' orderly march, decided to stomp on their trail. The chaos that ensued was devastating, and Antony lost many friends that day. Life inside the colony was no better. The queen, though revered by all, was an unforgiving ruler. Her sole purpose was to lay eggs, and she expected absolute loyalty from her subjects. Worker ants like Antony had no say in their roles or futures. Dissent was not tolerated, and individuality was seen as a weakness. Antony often dreamed of escaping the colony, of living a life free from the rigid hierarchy. But where could an ant go? The world outside the colony was hostile, and an ant alone was as good as dead. One evening, as Antony returned to the nest with his team, he overheard two soldier ants discussing a rebellion against the queen. The idea intrigued Antony, but he knew it was a dangerous path. The queen's enforcers were everywhere, and any hint of rebellion would be crushed without mercy. Just when Antony thought life couldn't get worse, disaster struck. A sudden downpour flooded the colony's tunnels, forcing the ants to evacuate. Antony and his fellow workers scrambled to save the queen's eggs, but the raging waters showed no mercy. 4 hours, Antony fought against the current, carrying one egg after another to higher ground. Many ants were lost in the chaos, and the colony was left in ruins. As the waters receded, Antony looked around at the devastated landscape and wondered if it was all worth it. Despite the hardships, Antony began to see the resilience of his kind. Together, the ants rebuilt their colony, stronger and more united than before. Antony realized that while being an ant was a life of struggle, it was also a life of purpose, though he still dreamed of a world beyond the colony. Antony found solace in the strength and unity of his fellow ants. They were small, but together, they could overcome anything. And so, Antony's journey continued, a story of resilience, unity, and the bittersweet reality of being born as an ant.